Today, I would like to talk about the delays, liquidated and ascertained damages, extensions of time in construction from the 3 contract PAM 2018, CEB 2000, PWD 203A. First is PAM contract 2018. Under the PAM contract 2018, the contractor must submit a written notice to the architect within 28 days of the delay event, along with an initial estimate of the required extension of time. A final claim must be submitted within 28 days after the delay ends, supported by full particulars. The architect must assess the claim and issue a certificate of extension of time within 40 weeks of receiving sufficient details. If the contractor fails to provide necessary information, it may lose its entitlement to an extension. The architect considers relevant events, for example, force majeure, employer delays, nominated subcontractor delays, but cannot set a completion date earlier than the original contract date. Even after practical completion, the architect may review and adjust the completion date within 12 weeks, but any granted extension cannot be reduced. Key differences: strict notice requirements, 28-day deadlines for initial and final claims. Architect's role is central in assessing delays and granting extensions. No automatic LAD deductions focuses on procedural compliance before penalties apply. Next is PWD Form 203A. In PWD 203A, if the contractor fails to complete the works on time, the superintending officer, SO, issues a certificate of non-completion, triggering the employer's right to deduct liquidated and ascertained damages. LAD at the rate specified in the contract. The LAD is deducted from payments or recovered from the performance bond, and the contractor does not need to be proven at fault. The agreed rate is deemed reasonable. The SO can ask the completion date later, requiring the employer to refund any excess LAD deducted for the extended period. However, the contractor remains obligated to complete the works even after LAD deductions. Key differences: LAD is enforced immediately upon non-completion, without needing proof of actual loss. Employer has strong recovery rights, direct deductions, bond claims, debt recovery. No detailed delay analysis focuses on enforcing penalties rather than assessing causes. CIDB Standard Form 2000. The CIDB 2000 contract allows the superintending officer to issue a certificate of non-completion if the works are delayed. The employer can then claim liquidated damages, LD, at the contract rate. However, if further delays occur due to employer-caused events, for example, late site possession, changes in laws, the SO must grant an extension, and the employer must refund any LD collected for that period. If LD is legally unenforceable, the employer can still claim actual damages. Unlike PAM 2018, the CIDB contract permits post-completion adjustments to the completion date, ensuring fairness if delays were beyond the contractor's control. Key differences: balanced approach LD applies, but extensions adjust penalties fairly. Employer must refund LD if delays are its fault. Fallback to actual damages if LD is legally invalid. Next, I dictate to talk about the case. First is Cubic Electronics, SDN BHD in liquidation, VMAS Telecommunications, SDN BHD 2019. Case introduction. The appellant, a company in liquidation, agreed to sell its land and machinery to the respondent for RM 90 million. The respondent paid an initial earnest deposit, ED, of RM 1 million, less than the required RM 2.6 million under the tender terms. The liquidators granted multiple extensions for signing the sale and purchase agreement, SPA, each time increasing the ED, totaling RM 3.04 million, including interest. When the respondent failed to sign the SPA by the final deadline, the appellant forfeited the deposits. The respondent sued, claiming wrongful termination and seeking a refund. The High Court upheld the forfeiture, but the Court of Appeal, COA, reversed it, ruling that only the initial RM 1 million was forfeitable, and that the appellant failed to prove actual loss under Section 75 of the Contracts Act 1000. 950 CA. Court, a judgment. The federal court allowed the appellant's appeal, reinstating the High Court's decision, but on different grounds. No need for proof of actual loss under Section 75 CA. Reasonable compensation, forfeiture, is enforceable without actual loss, provided the amount is proportionate and safeguards a legitimate interest. Cavendish Square Holding B.V. Bitalal El-Makdisi. Deposit characteristics. The additional payments, RM 2.04 million, were part of the ED, not penalties, as they were intended to secure the SPA and formed part of the total 10% deposit, RM 9 million. Proportionality. The forfeited sum, 3.33% of the purchase price, was reasonable compared to the RM 90 million transaction. Legitimate interest. The liquidators acted to protect creditors' interests, including lost opportunities. For example, rejecting a higher offer of RM 135 million due to the respondent's delay. Interest payment, RM 40,000. This was a separate agreed term, non-refundable, and outside Section 75 CA. Conclusion. The forfeiture was valid as the ED payments were reasonable and proportionate. The respondent's failure to complete the sale justified forfeiture under the tweaked contract terms. The COA's reliance on strict proof of actual loss was overturned, clarifying that Section 75 CA permits forfeiture based on legitimate interests and proportionality, not just proven damages. Introduction of the case. The appellant, a company in liquidation, agreed to sell its land and machinery to the respondent for RM 90 million. The respondent paid an initial earnest deposit, ED, of RM 1 million less than the required RM 2.6 million under the tender terms. The liquidators granted multiple extensions for signing the sale and purchase agreement, SPA, each time increasing the ED, totaling RM 3.04 million, including interest. When the respondent failed to sign the SPA by the final deadline, the appellant forfeited the deposits. The respondent sued, claiming wrongful termination and seeking a refund. The High Court upheld the forfeiture, but the Court of Appeal, COA, reversed it, ruling that only the initial RM 1 million was forfeitable, and that the appellant failed to prove actual loss under Section 75 of the Contracts Act 1950 CA. Next is Yap Yu Cheong and Nor V. Durga Niaga Solanger, SDN BHD. Case introduction. This was an appeal by the defendant against the senior assistant registrars. Decision granting summary judgment to the plaintiffs under Order 14 of the Rules of the High Court 1980. The dispute involved 3 debt offset agreements, not standard property sale contracts between the parties to settle debts owed by Europlus Corp SDN to WCT Engineering BHD. The agreements stipulated that if the defendant failed to complete property redemption and deliver disclaimer letters within 6 months, they would be liable for late payment damages, LAD, at 12% annual interest, calculated daily, on the purchase price. Due to the defendant's 1,199-day delay in redeeming 3 properties, the plaintiffs claimed total LAD of RM 405,623.32. The defendant argued the clause constituted an invalid penalty under Section 75 of the Contracts Act 1950. The plaintiffs claim for 8% post-judgment interest on top of the 12% LAD violated Section 11 of the Civil Law Act 1956. Court judgment. The federal court dismissed the defendant's appeal, ruling no legal distinction between liquidated damages and penalties. Under Section 75 of the Contracts Act, courts need only determine reasonable compensation without differentiating between the two. Para 12. Penalty clauses not automatically invalid. Whether classified as liquidated damages or penalties, the aggrieved party is entitled to reasonable compensation up to the agreed amount without proving actual loss. Paras 12, 14, 26. Burden of proof on defaulting party. The defendant bore the burden to prove the stipulated sum was an unreasonable penalty. Para 13. Interest claims valid. The 12% LAD served as a damages calculation benchmark, not compound interest. The 8% post-judgment interest on principal plus interest complied with. Order 42 Rule 12 of the RHC, paras 37 to 39. Conclusion. The court upheld the plaintiff's claims, finding the contractual terms valid. The LAD clause aimed to compensate losses, not punish, requiring no proof of actual damages. The defendant failed to demonstrate unreasonableness, thus owing full LAD plus statutory interest. The judgment clarified that Section 75 of the Contracts Act focuses on reasonable compensation, not formal classification of clauses.